Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. Today we are going to interview George Dicenzo, assistant professor at Queen University. So the first question we have is, what is your area of research?
Yeah, so thank you for this invitation today. So I'm a bacteriologist, so I work on a group of bacteria known as rhizobia. So they're a diverse group of bacteria that can live by themselves in the soil, but they also enter into an endosymbiotic relationship with legume plants where they fix nitrogen, so they convert nitrogen gas into ammonia, and which can be used by the plant for growth. So we use diverse techniques spanning from molecular genetics to systems biology and computational biology to study this area.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Really interesting. How do you describe your research to the general public?
Yeah, so I mainly focus on the bigger picture of the research. So the reason people are interested in rhizobia is the agricultural potential of it. So as you may know, there's lots of nitrogen fertilizer that's applied to agricultural fields. This is an expensive product, but it's also environmentally hazardous. So a lot of the nitrogen runs off, it enters water bodies, leads to eutrophication, algal blooms. Think, for example, the algal bloom in the Gulf of Mexico. And so nitrogen fertilizer is not a really environmentally sustainable way of agricultural intensification. So rhizobia have the potential to replace that nitrogen fertilizer if we can improve the rates it fixes nitrogen and improve its effectiveness in the field. We can reduce the reliance on nitrogen fertilizer, allowing us to increase agricultural yield while reducing its environmental impact.
Perfect. Really interesting. I hope we can go there one day that we don't need to use synthetic fertilizers and we can just depend on microbials.
Yeah, it would be ideal. Some places have had more success than others, but it's moving towards that way.
Perfect. So what do you generally tell a student or a postdoc that is interested in working with you?
Yeah, so I like to focus on, I tell them about the work we do in the lab. Depending on what they're particularly interested in is what I kind of focus on and their types of questions. But one thing I like to point out to students is the diverse range of methods we use, because it really means there's kind of something for everyone. If you're interested in programming, there's something that can be done. And so I like to emphasize that we can tailor the projects based on what their particular interests are so that we can find what they're interested in doing. I also like to, right from the beginning, emphasize the fact that science, unfortunately, has a lot of disappointment because things often don't work. And I like to bring it up early so that students have the understanding that it's common for things not to work right the first time. That's normal. It can be disappointing, but that's the expectation. And so you shouldn't be worried about things not working. That's just how it goes. And hopefully eventually things go nicely.
It's interesting because all the new professors, they just said really similar. Do you remember that moment that make you want to study microbiology?
So I can't say the reason for microbiology specifically, other than that's kind of the first lab I got into and I enjoyed it and never left. But I can say the moment, or at least the day that I knew I wanted to do research. So when I was in undergrad, I had interest both in going like the grad school route for research, but also going the med school route to be a physician. So there was one day when I was in the lab. Well, in the lab, I got rejections from at least one med school. And then I ran like restriction digest on a gel and it looked like garbage and I had no idea what happened. So I was just disappointed from both of those. I gave up, went to the gym. And while I was in the gym, I managed to figure out what went wrong with the restriction digest. I mixed up the enzymes. So I went back to the lab, redid it, ran it on the gel and everything looked perfect. And it was that kind of like collection of experiences that really made me realize that it was the research I liked, the chance to kind of solve those problems and do the research. So it was that day that really helped me decide that grad school is the way I wanted to go.
Perfect. It's good that you didn't go to med school. Now we have an amazing microbiologist and not a physician.
Right.
So what do you tell to the student when they graduate? I don't know if you already graduate student because you are fairly new professor. So
Yeah, so I mean, so I started in 2019, so I haven't had any grad students that have graduated yet, although hopefully the end of this year would be the first one. But I did have one undergrad thesis student that finished, although they finished in the middle of a pandemic, which is not, so what I said to them then probably won't be very representative of what I'd normally say to students. But I think the main thing I'd want students to know when they're graduating is to keep in mind that regardless of whether they're staying in science, doing something else, whether things worked well, whether they got the data they wanted, it didn't, they would have learned a ton of skills that are transferable to whatever they do. Their problem solving, communication, leadership, teamwork, etc. There's just so much they would have learned in grad school, regardless of how well it went from their perspective. And I think that's something I want them to keep in mind when moving on to the next stage of their careers.
Really important. So the last question, what do you remember about your first CSM meeting?
Yeah, so the first CSM meeting I went to was in 2016, which was at the University of Toronto. And one thing I can remember about that is thinking I should have gone to them sooner. So I started grad school much before that. I didn't go to them. And so it took me a while to go to them, but I've gone to all but one since then. And the only reason I missed the one was because I was in Italy and it was too far to travel. But yeah, I mean, the reason I say I should have started earlier and the reason I keep going back is because, I mean, there's a ton of awesome microbiology that's presented at the meetings. Canada has such a great group of microbiologists. So it's just exciting to hear other work. And it's also a great group of people. And it's always nice to just meet up with people there. And yeah, it's a wonderful community. So I encourage students to go because it's also a great meeting for students. There's lots of student opportunities to present. So it's a nice meeting.
Yeah, I think that's the reason also why I love it so much, because it was different to other conference that I've been attending. There is more sense of community, and people is more, it's also an opportunity to be humble, because you think you are doing amazing, and then when you go there and you see other
Right.
people work, it's like, okay, maybe to turn the level of ego a little bit down, because
Right.
it's a really good community. So
but I'm sure people feel the same way when they see like everyone present. So that's
yes.
a common feeling. Yeah.
And everything is interesting. Even I just discovered that E. coli is so interesting during my CSM meeting.
Right.
E. coli was basically a tool I used in the lab, but apparently we have so much to learn from many other organisms. So, yeah, so that's really great. Thank you very much. We haven't met in person. Hopefully in 2022 we can meet again. And for now, let's keep it online.
Yes. Yeah. I look forward to when we can meet in person and have CSM meetings in person again.